I just
Yeah.
want to know, you know, I just want to know, like, am I the butt of an inside joke that the whole student body is? Because that's cool if it is. I don't mind that. I don't go away in a couple of years, but just let me know. Give me a heads up.
I think we
Were
just
they?
found our cold open.
Yeah. What's Dr. Big Ticket?
I'm like, okay, so
Welcome to Learning Out Loud, where we get curious about all things teaching and learning. I'm Stefan, a regional technology coach, here with Andy, a regional math coordinator, and Cari, a regional science coordinator. We're just three educators on a mission to dig into what works, what doesn't, and what we're still figuring out. This podcast is for teachers, coaches, and leaders who want to grow in their professional practice. We don't have all the answers, but we're asking the questions and recording the process. Let's go to work.
All right. So Andy and I were in a district recently, and the staff had just finished watching this documentary called Count It Out. And Stefan, if you haven't seen it, it's really good.
I have not seen it. Is that the one you guys showed at the STEM Summit?
It is, yeah. Yep. So it's about the power of math.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah. So they had their whole staff watch the documentary, and then we were debriefing, and Andy and I got to come in and just kind of sit and be a part of the debrief conversation, which was kind of cool. So we were sitting at this table with one of the staff members, and she started talking about how she doesn't consider herself a math person or, good at math, which is kind of what this whole documentary is about this conversation where we talk about how we're not good at math and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But her husband is an economist. So really good at math, or at least she considers him really good at math because of his job.
You would hope he's really good at math.
Right. Right. He's probably got some skills. So she said she always lets him help their girls with their math homework. And she was hanging out and she observed him explaining a recent math homework. And I didn't catch how old her daughters were just based on, we were talking about age earlier, but just based on her age, I would say she has young girls. And she said she was, watching her husband explain this math homework assignment to her daughters. And she was like, that's not how I would do it. She was thinking about how she would have done it differently. And she would have explained it differently than her husband did to her daughters. And so she was just kind of questioning herself about how it didn't make sense to her the way her husband explained it. But she knew she could do that math and she just would have done it differently. So as I was sitting there listening to her tell this story about not being a math person, it made me think about this time that I was helping my brother with his math homework. And we were pretty young, probably middle school. So my brother's just a couple of years younger than I am. So we're similar in age. Anyway,
but you're older, right?
I am older. Yes. Yes. I'm the older sister, even though I'm the baby sister in the family train. But so I just remember getting really frustrated at him, and he was getting really frustrated at me. And the frustration came from, I just couldn't get why he couldn't get this math. I'm just oh my gosh, just, this is the rule. Just follow the rule. And Andy, we could talk about procedural math versus conceptual math, all this stuff. But all I was trying to get my brother to understand is this is just the rule. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, we were talking about multiplication of integers. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and a positive times a negative is a negative, and all of those rules, right? And my brother started crying. I remember that I made my brother cry over his math homework because he was so frustrated because he wanted to know why. Why is a negative times a negative a positive? I was it doesn't matter. Just do it. You can get this homework done if you just do it. Just follow the rules. Anyway, so this connection I was making to this woman's story about her husband helping and how she had thought about it differently, and then my own story about making my poor little brother cry about his math homework, had me questioning teaching. So my question for the two of you is this. Do you think a person's own struggle to understand or master something can lead them to better teaching strategies for students who are also struggling? So thinking about what I said, I just followed the rules. I'm a rule follower. Math felt really simple for me because I'm here's the algorithm, got it. Here's the rule, got it. I just follow the rules and I get the right answer. But then connecting it to this woman that was at our table where she was like, that's not how I would have explained it. And I know how to do that math. So on the screen, I put the question that I have for the two of you to talk about. Do you think a person's own struggle to understand or master something can lead them to better teaching strategies for students who are also struggling? Because I was struggling to help my brother because I didn't struggle with following the rules.
I think, yeah. I mean, I think the easy answer for this one is, yeah, of course. Like you hear that all the time from teachers. Well, I'm really excited to help students who are like me because I really struggled with X, Y, and Z. And that's why I became a teacher. Like you hear that a lot. I heard that from someone in our community a couple months ago who he's about to become a dad. He's a dad now. And I was just kind of chatting to him. I said, you guys ready? Like house prep stuff? He goes, yeah, I'm just really excited to be a dad because my dad wasn't really around and I know what I would have wanted, so that type of stuff. I think we hear that a lot in anybody's growth story is people don't, there was a need for support when they were going through something. And so now they're committed to being that support for other people. I think, yes, where I have always struggled with this is, does that have a tendency to pigeonhole someone's point of view? You know what I mean? Where like I struggle with this, so other people struggle with this. So like now my support is going to be hyper specific. Not that I've never ever seen that, but that's always in my head. It's like, well, there are other kids out there struggling with things that potentially that teacher was supporting with that just weren't equipped for, to help you with what you're doing. And I'll give Andy space here in a second, but that's me trying to be a contrarian. I think on a broad scale, people who go through something, struggle with something, and then master it have a wider perspective on the way you can approach problems.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the idea that if every person, student individualized their own way of thinking about something or mastering something or understanding something, if I go into that conversation of as a teacher or a side-by-side student, small group, that all the students in this little group or all the teachers in this PD are going to have their own way of processing something, how do I give them opportunity to think about their own way, to struggle it in their own way? Because their one route, you mentioned, Cari, the step-by-step procedure, right? That way of really making sense to you, to a person that can't follow step-by-step procedures and, a recipe or putting together a IKEA bed frame. I mean, we can go down the list of all the things that are step-by-step and struggling. But you also don't want to go the big picture of like, oh, I think I could throw this bunk bed together just by the feel of it. There's also some parts there to kind of think about a little bit of that conceptual. We want a bed at the end of this work together, but we might need to figure out like, how do I set myself up? What does that mean? Am I talking it out? Am I looking at it? So if I'm a teacher that has been trained one way in a content area, and mathematics and science are all those STEM areas sometimes get lumped into that idea like, oh, this is how we do math. This is how we do STEM fields, which, if I can ask Google now, it kind of shows like why would I need to have a teacher to go step by step? I know that's not what we're talking about now, but the idea like attacking a problem, what are your own strategies? Having that grace to let someone fight through that, or a group of teachers or students to kind of bring their own lens to it. I think your question, like if I'm struggling to master something, I can at least say, okay, that was helpful for me when I did this. It got me moving forward around whatever I'm trying to think about, that math problem or that idea of thinking about something different. I still have a concern when, the system's allowing teachers or educators or whoever to say, this is the one way of thinking about something, right? And like, this is how in my class, or when you're with me, or when I'm in the classroom, like you need to do it this way. And I just don't know what the rationale about that is right now. There might be some concern about safety, and there might be some things about that. don't know if I mentioned my wonderful shop teacher, Mr. Street. I think he's still around. I'll look that one up. But there was a reason.
Do we need to bleep out the name?
Yeah, probably. Well, no, it's a good story. There's a reason why he showed us a kickback and a table saw for safety. Like, we had to do things procedurally, otherwise we could get injured. But when I'm thinking about problem solving and strategies where I bring forward into solving a problem, especially in some stuff that's tough for kids, or I don't know, it feels like how do you nurture that and then move them forward? But then we run into that pushback of time. So I don't know. Great question, Cari. I think, yes. I think it helps us understand a little bit more when we're struggling. But there's also that family dynamic. Talk to your brother, right? Did you guys fight afterwards? Like, did you get fisticuff? Oh,
no. Have you met me?
I was going to say, Cari apologized profusely, and she's doing it again 30 years later. Well, Andy, your example about the IKEA couch, it has me thinking about the way someone might approach like that problem itself, right? Like, you buy something, whether it's IKEA or whatever, and they come with directions, but those directions are not just an essay with a bunch of words on a page. There are text directions, there are pictures alongside that, and then more and more commonly, there's like a QR code to video instruction. And if there's not, you look at the model number, you go to YouTube and you say how to assemble blah, 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 and you'll have someone walking you through step by step. And so my favorite thing to do in front of teachers is to say, hey, we all know that learning styles are a myth, right? Like, that's not a real thing. It wasn't founded in research. It was just someone kind of going by their gut however many years ago. What good practice and research tells us is that good learning is multimodal. Like, we might have preferences towards some of those things. We're all visual learners. But like, good deep learning is kinesthetic and audio and visual. Like, it's just a blend of all of those things. And so that IKEA example is exactly that, right? You have access to those things, and you're probably hopping between all of those different modes. And importantly, you have an end goal. Like, you have a picture of what this thing needs to look like by the very end. And so, like, thinking about a teacher or facilitator of learning in that example, I think it's more important that a teacher has a wide variety of experience, but also has a focus on what the end product needs to be, or say destination, because that also doesn't have to be the same product, right? What the destination needs to be, and the various ways that kids can get there, and the intentional questions they can ask to guide them through that process. Because if you put right behind me, there's a couch from IKEA that my wife and I put together when we first purchased this house. And as with any sort of shared project like that, how tense do you think that room was as we're setting up this couch? Oh, yeah. And if she is much more of I'm going to read the directions, I'm going to go down the page and read that. And I'm looking at the pictures and getting frustrated that the pictures aren't giving me all the detail that I need. And she's screaming at me. Well, maybe not really, but if you just read the directions, well, they don't make any sense to me and whatever, right? But like, we each have these different ways that we can approach this. And maybe we needed a mediator, we needed a facilitator in there to help us with building that couch, but we all had our own ways to access that, and we knew where we were going to get. And so then we could ask those questions and guide ourselves through. But that also wasn't the first time we had set up something like that. We were drawing on prior experience and what had worked for us in the past. Mm-hmm. Back to my original point, I think maybe some of my thinking in a scenario like that is, why would anyone read the directions? Why are you not looking at the pictures or watching the video? And as someone who doesn't learn super well from just reading text on a page, I don't retain that information super well. It is an anathema to me that someone can and would do that, and probably vice versa for my wife.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stefan. I'm going to wrap our conversation up with that, because that, I think, kind of goes to that original question that I posed, and that is, can a person's own struggle to understand something lead them to better teaching strategies? So what I heard you just say, Stefan, was like, you don't understand, like, why would you ever just read the directions? Like, let's just get to this. And that was my struggle with my brother too. Like, why do you need to know why it works? It just works. Just do it. Just do it the way I'm telling you to do it, and we can be done with your homework in 5 minutes and then go outside and do something fun or whatever. Not that math's not fun, Andy. Math is super fun. Everybody loves solving integer multiplication problems. I'm sure of it. Right, Stefan?
Only if you're a math person.
I
Ouch.
also want to thank IKEA for
Andy
sponsoring
just had
our
physical
podcast.
pain. Sorry,
Right?
what?
Oh, I said I also want to thank IKEA for sponsoring our podcast because we said IKEA a lot.
If only.
All right. Well, thank you. So my point was I started with a story, telling you guys a story. And in Jim Knight's High Impact Instruction, Chapter 7, it's about stories and using stories as a high impact instructional strategy. And I don't know what my learning outcome, here's where I'm failing everybody, was. It was just really about how to get a conversation started using a story so that we could talk through this question that I had posed for the two of you. But so in this chapter, Knight starts out like acknowledging that stories don't often make the list of effective teaching practices. And I think that's okay. And we're going to talk about maybe some of the hangups of using stories as we work through the chapter a little bit. But he says like they're not often on the list, but they deserve to be because stories help people learn when they're being entertained and that you're engaged in the story. And they often will provide like a context for abstract ideas. So if you're in the classroom trying to teach something abstract, a story can help a student remember the learning better and connect it to something real. Like stories can help make ideas real. And they can also help students connect to their teachers. Like now you guys know I'm not a very good teacher of math, that I make people cry. So now you know a little bit more about me
I would have assumed that about
as an
you
older
anyways.
sister. Yeah.
Going around making people cry.
Here we are. Anyway, so my next question for the two of you is, can you remember a time that either you used a story or someone used a story to teach you something? And then following up to that, was that experience powerful in making your learning stick or making your students' learning stick? And why do you think so?
No, I'm making this connection right now with some of the other mathematics work that we've been doing around, the building thinking classroom model around a launch. We just were in this workshop last week, Cari, where I was told a story about Cari's, might have been a white lie, a little fib, about her Minnesota State Championship tic-tac-toe playing that she had to launch this.
I've seen the trophy.
This task. I've also been in a training where they've talked about, a connection with candy or something about how, peanut butter cups are the favorite. And there's all these different styles of peanut butter cups. And you just keep talking about the perfect blend of peanut butter and chocolate and just make this picture that's visible. And then you talk about how you can break them up. And now the next thing you're doing a fraction lesson, right? I mean, so I think this chapter really is, that idea of like, if we can tell a story that brings up some patterns, right? Look at all these visuals of like Cari's up here. We're going to have Cari compete against the whole class because she is a championship level tic-tac-toe player, right? And all of a sudden everyone's like, what are we doing? And then we ask, okay, well, how many ways can she win? We did this kind of idea before where getting the connection, like the someone in the room that I can make a connection with, that says, yes, I'm also thinking that way. I also love playing tic-tac-toe. And now I'm bought into that. I love peanut butter and chocolate. Oh, I hate peanut butter and chocolate. Whatever it may be, there's that connection and that voice that, you've already hooked on it. And it's not a long 15-minute conversation like sometimes I do on these podcasts, but it's more of a quick launch. Ooh, I got it. Now let's get into the work. Let's get into what we're talking about. But I do remember those stories more than I do maybe the actual like lecture or PowerPoint or my college days, to be honest with you, because those feel like those just all by myself. But to getting kids talking or remember those ideas that are happening and like, oh yeah, let's talk about this idea. Or has anybody been outside? Let's look at this. This is the story of the history of this landscape. And you kind of tell like all those things that are happening and visualize this and like making our brain think about some of those pieces that really give us that application of what we're thinking about. So that's where I'm going about things that have been powerful to me. How about you, Stefan? What do you got going?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my classroom. I did it every now and then with students. I think I have a tendency to do this more than I should because I talk a lot. It's like my biggest weakness as a teacher and an instructional coach is I just say too many things. And so it has me reminiscing about my 7th graders and how I would tell stories, sometimes, personal, sometimes to make connections for academic reasons. Every now and then I'd come in. There's this one time the evening before I had been at the Verizon store because my phone wasn't working. And there's this really nice customer service agent on the other end of the phone named Belinda. And the fact that I remember her name is just, and so like, I was just kind of telling that to my like first period class the next morning because it was funny and there was no real academic purpose. That would have been fall. In the spring, kids were still coming to me and referencing that story. And I was like, that was kind of a nothing. Like, I was just, isn't this funny? And I had this funny interaction and it did humanize me to them unintentionally, right? I was just telling them something and kind of getting the class warmed up and ready to go. And I have found I actually do this a lot more intentionally with adult learners than I did with students. And maybe it's because that's just been, more of my recent practice, but when I do things around, especially like social emotional learning and community engagement, I have a tendency to pull on experiences from my classroom. Like there's this like all-time moment personally from my classroom about like this students just being nice to each other because of the structures that were set up around them. And it was just them really taking hold. And that really lands with teachers as it's meant to. Mm-hmm. But using that as a way to springboard teachers into reflecting on those moments in their own classroom, because most of us have those, right? Like you teach long enough, kids are going to wow you, and they really grapple onto those like relationships and personal experiences. And so like I'll do that. I've got one workshop with one story I'm thinking in particular where that really lands. And then especially when I'm working with teachers in early learning, because I've got, no one wants to hear about your own kids too much, but mine are kind of in that sweet spot at 3 and 6, where they're still kind of rascals. And I was in a district a couple weeks ago and I made some joke about like, does anybody want a 3-year-old? And like 3 hands like went in the air, like, I'll take them, because they just like love little kids. And so that's my only view into early learning, as I never taught it. And so anything I can do to relate my first grader or kindergartner last year to these early learning teachers. I actually had someone tell me, what is today? So it would have been Friday. I had someone tell me on Friday, just last week, that, oh, I'm really glad to know that you have a first grader. And essentially she said, because that gives you credibility. And not that I was using it in that way, but the words she used were something around like, developmentally what's going on. And we were talking about AI. And so me saying like, here's how we're using AI and students using AI, it lended a little bit of weight and credibility and humanism to me saying to them, maybe they're not using it this young, because if I came home and talked to my first grader and his teacher had him using some AI tools, I'd have some questions, So being able to tell stories about my kids has those unintentional consequences. So yeah, I end up using it a lot more with adults than I ever did with kids.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. So Andy, what I heard you say is like using stories to get people engaged, entertained, like hooked into what's going to happen in the lesson. And then Stefan, you're acknowledging like the connection piece, right? To humanize yourself or give yourself credibility or just to build community around and using stories. So Knight, in the text, he's got these little QR codes and you can watch videos. And one of the first videos that he has in there is a teacher telling her students a story about this story she was reading, this novel that she was reading, that she couldn't believe what was happening in the story. So then she went to go tell her husband about it. Like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe what happened. And she's like, I told him what happened. And he was not like appalled. And she's like, and then I realized that I had left out this part of the story. And I'm not giving you guys very much detail because I don't remember all of it in details. And then she launched into the importance of story structure and like, why would it be important to have all these details? So she did a beautiful job of connecting this story about how she left out a very important piece of the plot. And then her husband didn't get it. And then it turned into, all right, what's really important for you to remember as you guys start to write stories about whatever. And I just thought it was really well done. She had used this story to help her students remember that it's really important to get all the details in there and to think through the plot and not leave anything out, because then somebody might not get it.
I mean, it's a great way to capture that. Why do we have to do this? As opposed to just thinking about writing itself, as opposed to treating writing like a checklist. You have to have your topic sentence. You have to have your plot. You have to have your exposition. You have to have your climax. You have to have your whatever, which transparently is the way I taught a lot of writing. And I knew it wasn't good in the moment. Like to say like, here are the consequences of leaving something out, and have kids feel that and connect emotionally and then backtrack into that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So
really good.
Even in writing, to have a scripted recipe is a bad idea.
Yes.
Wait a second.
I did say
but
that.
It's a different idea, not a bad idea. We just talked about some people need the scripted checklist.
Yeah.
Some people need to know why it is that they need to have a.
Yeah, no structure isn't good either. Right?
I'm gonna say
then you turn into George R.R. Martin, who won't release the next Game of Thrones book, A Song of Ice and Fire, and we've been waiting like 15 years for The Winds of Winter because he's a gardener and he just lets his things go, and he's not an architect to structure his thoughts.
Okay, 20 minutes in, and we already went sci-fi into the world of
fantasy. Fantasy.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
I thought, Andy, I brought up stories.
Yeah, that was a natural fit. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, in the chapter, just like we've seen in previous chapter, Knight starts talking about the use of stories between the two different types of instruction that he brings out. So the intensive explicit instruction and the constructivist instruction. And so he talks about the goal of using stories from an intensive explicit instruction is for you to build a story that paints a picture for students that is exactly the same as the picture of you as a teacher, right? So you're telling the story so that students can form in their mind the exact same picture that you have. And then in contrast, the constructivist instruction, the goal of the story is to support students in building their own understanding from their own prior knowledge. And so those stories are often kind of open-ended, and they can like build understanding through their own experiences to start connecting the dots. So just to shorten that up, the contrast, he says, is the intensive explicit instruction. It's the teacher telling the story to make the connections for the students between the story and the content. And in constructivist, it's supporting the students in building their own understanding, making their own connections, using their own prior knowledge. So that's one thing that comes out in the chapter is like, what are the uses of stories and how do they differ based on your teaching style or the teaching style that you're using for that lesson? Because I think we talked about in a previous conversation that often teachers are a blend of both of these things, right? Mm-hmm. Intensive, explicit, as well as constructivist.
When I always think about those things and like the risk, like I as someone who has a tendency to lean towards that constructivist piece more of the time, and taught alongside someone who was very much explicit instruction and who was a great teacher, it has me thinking about Andy's IKEA furniture, generic furniture brand example, where like I'm looking back at this couch. It's supposed to be a couch, not a bunk bed, right? And so like if I'm just making my own connections, well, this could probably fit here, and like who cares if we have like 6 or 7 leftover screws? What could the harm be, right? There is an end goal, so I do see the value in like constructing, like you gotta get to this certain place, but also contrasting that with Andy's point of like, oh, so a script or a recipe for learning isn't good in ELA either. No, right? But it's always a blend of those two things.
Yeah.
I've been thinking too, and sorry to cut you off, Cari, but the idea that my story as Andy, older now than I had been in the past, right? How do I get connections to kids in my classroom from my experiences? Bringing in others' stories, bringing in other ways or having kids share. Like that also that area for us to get that voice in there. So then maybe I could tell students, hey, you guys are all math. You are all math kids. You're all whatever. But until they hear it, like, oh wait, you've struggled before too as a kid that looks like me and sounds like me or has experiences like me, and also are a person that is in training after high school or community college after that hope there to connections. Because I walk into classrooms and my kids look at me like whatever, dad, like that look. But they also that also happens in schools too, like mm-hmm. What does this teacher tell, whatever, that they don't get me, but like those stories then share like, oh, there's a connection. Okay, this person also had some things. This person maybe had struggles in middle school, even though they're adults now, that they can say that trust of, hey, I know, just work with me here this year or this period or whatever it may be. Maybe have that agency starts to develop, or that an identity shift of where they thought themselves as a learner. I don't know. It just, because, sometimes it's like, oh, here goes the teacher again, just telling me, here's how you do the homework. Here's what you did wrong in the homework. All right, now here's the new stuff you need to learn about what we're talking about. It's like, that sounds, is the way you're describing it, that method should be kicked to the curb, even though it's probably generally out there still as a way to push kids through education or push them through that learning of something new. Like, this is how you do it. This is what we want you to do it. And I better get the information that I told you how to do it back in here. So I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about a little bit. But sorry, Cari, I just a little bit.
No, you're okay. In fact, did you read the book? Because you just brought up a whole bunch of reasons why we would tell stories, which is part of the chapter. Is
Andy's been cheating.
I know. Thank you for that beautiful plant or segue or whatever you want to call it. But so Knight shares in this chapter that there's lots of purposes for telling stories in the classroom. And so I'll just go through the list. There's anchoring new knowledge, building prior knowledge, prompting thinking and dialogue, generating interest, inspiring hope, offering new perspectives, describing epiphanies, and building community. And I think all of those are pretty self-explanatory. And I feel like, Andy, you just brought up at least 5 of those when you were talking about stories, because you were talking about you give them hope to know that I also struggled at math, or give them a new perspective. Like, the teacher wasn't the best at math either, or, and I think back to like the story I kicked us off with around this conversation at a table about Count It Out. And that was just prompting thinking and dialogue. Like, I just shared that story so that you two would talk about what does it mean to come up with teaching strategies or whatever. So I guess that leads to like my next question for the two of you. And that is there one of those purposes that resonates more with you than others? And Andy, you kind of shared a little bit because you just brought up all of those things. Yeah. But
I'm sorry if I screwed up your flow, but
not at all. No. What flow? Do we have flow? I thought we were just talking here.
We're in flow right now.
We haven't even started recording yet.
Oh, great. Perfect. This is practice.
Stefan, what are you thinking? What's resonating right now with you?
It's definitely, it's prompting thinking and dialogue. And I don't know if it's because the last 2 chapters that we've talked about in this are all about talking, right? Thinking prompts and intentional questioning. And I just so value the conversation and meaning making in a classroom. And it's very fun to watch kids come to their own epiphanies. To bring it back to my own, I guess that's a different one, right? That's describing epiphanies. But the thinking about my own like young kids, my oldest he's doing better about reflecting about school and like telling us things and like making these connections. And we're trying to be really intentional about like using certain language, or that's a great observation. That's a really good, connection. And that how does that make you feel? Those types of things. And so getting him to prompt and talk about that. And then with our 3-year-old who is pretty verbal and is much more fluent now, hearing him, like asking him questions and watching his little brain try to reason things out, like just that prompting. There's so much power in like thinking and talking about it. And like if you take the time to step back from an instructional setting, whether that's with teachers or that's with students, it just listening to the conversations and being able to insert yourself and guide those things. There's something very satisfying and very, 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 very exciting about people taking conversations and topics in directions that you never expected, but are still on track, right? So I'm thinking about this workshop that I led on Friday, half day in the morning. We're talking about AI, and I have this like sorting activity. And the whole point is, and I tell them this, the whole point is conversation, is meaning making. And there are no right answers. It's just a bunch of little squares that are what's appropriate, what level of AI use is appropriate in this given task. And so teachers are sorting different teacher tasks and student tasks. And I had done that the day before, Thursday evening, and we did it for about 15, 20 minutes, and it was pretty good. And then I did it with an entire school staff the next day, and we were on it for 2.5 hours. It was awesome. I only had 3.5 hours with them, but they got so into it, and their conversations were so in depth and were so like poignant that it wasn't necessarily the activity that took 2.5 hours. It was, on the fly. I was like, okay, so now you're going to group them and you're going to color code them because they all relate to different like depth of knowledge or teaching tasks and stuff. And so now what patterns do you see? Now flip with the table next to you and like compare contrast and like, how does this relate to so-and-so? And so like, it was just all in the moment differentiation, trying to grab their, and so I know this isn't stories, but it's just that like the more you can get a group of people talking about something that they care about and make a connection to like explore that authentically. Because I think part of the danger of like telling stories to kids is kind of what Andy said. You walk in the door and they're like, okay, dad, okay, mom, and it's what I think is important and interesting is not necessarily going to be, it sure as heck will not be important and interesting to all of my kids all at once. Right. And so the more you can like prompt their thinking for them to be telling their own stories, having their own conversations, making their own connections, that one really, really stood out to me. And I think I would say probably is the most impactful.
Yeah. I love that you used a story to help us understand what you chose.
I told you, it seems to be my accidental go-to. I just talk so much, man.
Yeah, it is. Andy, what are you thinking? What was a purpose that resonated with you?
No, that I think the idea of the community building and then just showing relationships and trust and maybe that inspiring hope. My career has taken me from a department of 12 teachers teaching the content to a singleton department where I teach, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. So the both the same. But if the kids see you as human, I guess, or relatable, or maybe not a system cog, I guess. I don't know how else to put that, because at the larger district, having lunch out in the commons with the kids, and the smaller district out in the commons with the kids, or going to an event, even though you don't really want to, and then you see those kids and they come back into class, or you're talking about the story from the night before at an event where you're like, say, hey man, I saw you up there in the play. That was awesome. And like, just making that connection. I mean, that's really relevant to, I think is probably what I'm getting at, but also the point where I had my best time sometimes teaching was when you built that community, and you said 4 years of the same students in a cohort, you got to know them. You became part of that group, and then just not, I'm in this period. You know what I mean? No, like, yeah, we're learning something together, I guess. And how do you, setting that up, and that stories of, just making those connections of like, oh, you saw me there? Yeah, I saw. Oh, wow. Like it was like surprised that a kid has never seen a teacher at one of their events, perhaps, or be able to talk with them outside of that content and whatever they're supposed to be talking. Like, hey, well, wait, you want to talk about the basketball game you saw me at on Tuesday night? Wait, that's weird. Like, we're supposed to talk about math, or we're supposed to talk about science, but that interest, that inspiring, that hope, like, no, hey, we're here together. I have an interest in you outside of this textbook. And so those little like snippet stories, and then also sharing like my own experience of whatever education or socializing in a setting. Granted, it's completely different, which then that's also a go-to, like with my own kids. Like, I have no idea what it's like to be a 14 or 15-year-old kid in 2025. Zero. So you open up, you tell me about how is it going? What is this? What's going on? Like, what are you reading about on your TikTok, like, that I don't have? And all of these things are like, have you heard about this stuff? They still don't know 6767. That's fine with me.
My 6-year-old won't stop saying it. No idea what it means.
and no one knows. And I find that fascinating. And so it's like, hey, I'm like, all right, guys, well, I'm going to do 8989 then. So let it roll.
But that's not part of the song. 8989 isn't in the song. It's
There's a
6767. Yeah.
There's a song?
Yes, that's where it comes from. I still don't know what it means, but it's in a song.
Are we going to get copyright struck if we use this song as the outro? Maybe not copyright, but definitely fired is my guess.
Yeah, we might want to kill this part.
You go into a classroom, they start doing this stuff, and it's like, okay, 6-7, is it appropriate?
And that's why I Google the stuff, is because I have to make sure that bad things aren't being said, or bullying isn't happening or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm going around like now, like everyone, because my kids in high school, and we they got all these activities or friend groups. I am now referred to as Dr. Big Ticket, and I said, "Is that? I mean, are you making fun of me?" Like I'm literally asking them. Okay, so should I think it's great, but are you making fun of me?
It's fine. I just want to know.
I just want to know. I just want to know, like, am I the butt of an inside joke that the whole student body is? Because that's cool if it is. I don't mind that. I don't go away in a couple of years, but just let me know. Give me a heads up.
I think we just found our cold open.
Yeah. What's Dr. Big Ticket?
Dr. Big Ticket. I'm like, okay, so. And then a couple other dads or coaches or teacher friends around the community. There's like Coach Sauce, which is like for like special sauce or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's a McDonald's reference in my world, but are you making so all these things? So it's just
that's a defensive back for the New York Jets,
right?
Right? Is it Sauce Gardner?
Yeah. And so when I grew up, I go, Big Ticket was Kevin Garnett's name, and I go, that's a good one if that's what it is, unless it's like the 6-7 thing. I don't know, whatever. So yeah,
how did we get here from stories?
I don't know.
These are stories.
And like tapping into what kids know, right? Or what they're interested in. Yes.
Okay, way to bring it back around, Stefan.
That was good.
I guess.
Big Ticket.
So
Dr. Big Ticket.
Yeah, I like it. Let us know when you find out the real answer. Are you a joke?
I know I'm a joke. I'm the butt of many jokes, I'm pretty sure, but no, this is a good one. If the kids are having fun, I don't know. I'm just old is what I'm coming down to. So older.
All right. So in the chapter, Knight also talks about like what makes an effective story. So we were kind of talking about that and talking about sometimes stories can derail the learning.
Not a chance. I don't believe it.
But Stefan, you'll appreciate, well, maybe you won't appreciate this, but when I saw his checklist, because in his book, he's got like this checklist of what makes an effective story. The very first one is the stories are not lame. And I don't know why it made me think of you, Stefan. I think it's because you yell lame sometimes when we're talking about stuff. I was like, Stefan, your story can't be lame. So he talks about how effective stories are not lame. They're concise, they're vivid, they evoke emotion, they're surprising, and they're humble. And he does talk, this relates a little bit to what you were saying, Andy, about stories where you might be sharing stories about struggling, but I've also been in classrooms where teachers are telling stories of their glory days, right? About being the star quarterback and stuff like that, and how that can actually alienate students when they feel like you're bragging. And if I'm not an athlete, how am I connecting with you if you're just telling me how amazing you are from this, something great about yourself? You could remove your own name from the story and talk about, I knew this person who could do this thing. And then the story is still the same, but it has a different tone for students, and they might be able to relate to it differently than if it's you telling the story about yourself and how great you are. I thought that was really interesting that he put that in the chapter, just talking about how some things can come across as bragging. So humble was on the list, I guess, I'm elaborating on humble. But so he talks about using stories and how you can integrate them at different points in a lesson. It doesn't always have to be the start of a lesson, like you kick it off. It could be that the story belongs in a different place in the lesson. And so you plan ahead for using stories. I probably never did. I'm sure I threw lots of stories out there, but they would have just organically started because a student asked a question or we started talking about a topic, and then I was like, oh, I got to go see the fossils at Dinosaur National Park, or whatever. So he does talk about integrating them at appropriate places in the lesson. And because again, the point of the story is to help students learn and help their learning stick. So there's some art to that, I guess. And let's see. So he talks about explicit versus in constructivist. So in explicit instruction, explicit intensive instruction, you state that you're telling a story. He talks about how you literally, in that style of teaching, you state that you're telling the story and why. And then in the constructivist instruction, you leave the conclusions up to students. You tell the story, and it's really for them to be thinking about, how does this story help me in my learning, that kind of stuff. But he emphasizes over and over that you really, when telling a story, you really need to stick to the learning. So it can't just be about entertaining. There should be like a goal. And I know in the community building, it feels like just entertaining would be the purpose, right? Or building connection between you and your students, which isn't a bad thing, but there should be some kind of reason why you would tell that story beyond just, here's a little bit about myself. Like, right. You are wanting students to learn something, but at the same time, be intentional about what it is that you want them to learn. Is it you want them to learn something about you that helps relate to a topic that you're talking about in the classroom or something like that? So anyway, he cautions against oversharing and bragging.
Good.
Yeah.
You tell me I should not have told the story about Belinda? She ruled. No, but like it does have me thinking on that. Like that was 2 minutes, right? As opposed to taking up, and then as kids were coming in the room. So I guess time and place, right? For these things like like I'm just looking through the chapter here as you're talking about it, intentionality, preparation, putting those things into place. It's interesting. A lot of like with what we're talking about in this, it's what's most important is what comes after. That's been kind of true in all of our chapters so far, is like, it's not about this. I mean, you started off by telling a story, which was great and engaging and interesting and fun. I think hit all these things. Well done and appropriately placed, Cari. Wow. But what's been really important is everything that's come after this, right? You called out the intentionality of that. Yeah, that's just very interesting. Sorry, that was my own out loud metacognitive thinking.
No, that's okay. We're learning out loud, Stefan. We're learning out loud here.
Wait,
she said it. She said the thing.
Yeah.
That's the name of our podcast, isn't it? Learning out loud.
Yes.
Look at us go.
Yeah. So he actually gives us tips in the chapter about how to find stories. And he says you should be drawing on your own memories. And he suggests like sitting down and building a timeline and like writing out your like a timeline of life events where you think there's a story here that could maybe connect to some sort of learning concept that you have in your classroom. I thought that was really interesting. And then he's like, write out all the details, make sure you haven't missed anything, and then think about the story structure. So there really is a lot of planning in these stories, but you think about the story structure. Is there escalation in your story? Is there a hero conflict resolution? Are you building or upsetting expectations? Do you have like an epiphany, and you want to share these epiphanies? Is there self-revelation, that kind of stuff? So you timeline out your life, and then you pick some stories and you think about, how can I tell this story in a structure that makes sense, that'll be entertaining and engaging and will help the learning stick for my students around this concept. And then he wraps up the chapter with some tips on telling stories. And one of them is planning ahead, even though like I said, I'm sure every story I ever told was impromptu, except maybe today's at the start of this recording. I planned for that one. But in my classroom, I had not read this chapter about how I should plan ahead. And so when you're planning ahead, you're thinking about, what's my learning goal? What is the story structure? Like, am I thinking about escalation or building and upside down? Is there a resolution? Is there a moral or a lesson to your story? And then after thinking about planning ahead, he says, but don't plan too much. You want it to also be spontaneous, because if it's really scripted, the kids will pick up on that too. And I think we could do that. And I worried a little bit in preparing for today, my story, when I was thinking about, just this thing that happened and the connection I made, I was like, well, I better not write it all out because then I'm going to sound like I wrote it all out. So I just like reminded myself right before we got started, like, okay, I was going to talk about this, and that's all I did.
That's interesting. I was wondering if he was going to put here something about it, like, it needs to be organic. Like kids see through that so fast, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, here goes Troutman, and he's clearly prepared this story, and then it's not believable, doesn't feel authentic. You can't connect with that. So that's I'm I think interested, glad to see that it's like a balance of, hey, make sure you prepare, but it's more like you more have it ready for the opportune time, or like you could plan it in there, but you're not then pulling out a script and reading and like telling the stories if you're reading a book. It needs to be true storytelling, which also makes me think, I'm not sure if this is the right or wrong thing to say. This strategy might not be for everybody. Like, I think it could fit. Okay, so you're not nodding. Like
That's what I'm wondering too. I'm wondering that as well. Like, is as a brand new teacher, let's say, right? Do you want to slow the roll on your storytelling or be more like, okay, I can't be bragging, like you said, Cari. I don't want to be whatever. Like that might be something too, versus the experiences of, okay, I can at least have some connect. I'm just wondering the same thing. Sorry.
Yeah.
But like,
And he doesn't really talk about that, but he just gives these cautions of, plan ahead, but don't do too much planning. Be spontaneous, keep it conversational, keep it short, keep it simple. You don't want too many details in there because now you might confuse a student. Like, what am I supposed to be getting out of this story?
Yeah.
Right? And appropriately paced. He has some guidance in there, but he does not talk about whether it's for everybody. But I had that same concern just because I know that I have derailed learning with stories because in an 8th grade promotion speech by a student, they talked about, oh, in Mrs. Hack's class, all you got to do is ask her a question. She'll just start talking about something. So anyway, their stories are not for everybody, I guess.
Well, and I would think like the best thing to do would be self-reflective about, do you have a focus on the learning? That seems to be, I guess, if you were to give advice to someone like, oh, this is a strategy I'd want to try out, would the number one thing be make sure you keep a focus on what kids are supposed to get out of this. You're not just telling stories.
Yeah.
It's
keep them short too. Like don't tell it doesn't have to be every detail, just the really important ones that help with the learning, the goal of the learning outcome.
And I guess I would also add to that, just because you might be nervous about like, oh, I don't want to derail learning, doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a shot, right? Like fail fast, that's fine, but have someone to be able to reflect on it with and say, I tried this. Like, how are you going to measure their connection afterwards? What are you looking for to make sure that your story actually landed? Yeah.
He does talk about that in the chapter too.
Oh.
Like thinking about like, what was the learning outcome? Did it support student learning? Like be reflective about the story, because maybe don't tell the story again if it didn't have the outcome that you wanted. Like just because you like telling that story because it makes sense for you doesn't mean that it's going to make sense for all of your students. Or you might just need to rewrite the story and think about different details or different things that you need to emphasize in the story to make it more relevant for learning, for student learning.
Gotcha.
And then he, at the end of every chapter, there's like a sum it up, but then he kind of breaks down some pieces for a teacher, for administrators, for instructional coaches. So in the instructional coach section, I wanted to pull that forward. He specifically says that instructional coaches can help teachers develop a bank of stories that can be used in a school setting. And he literally says, you can collect stories from everybody and they're in a bank. And I, as a teacher, I might grab one of Andy's stories because it's there and readily available. And I might use one of his stories because it helps connect with the learning. It doesn't always have to be your stories. You can use other people's stories. Like I might use that one teacher's, the video that I watched. If I were teaching writing about something, I might just steal her story because I may not have my own story around plot and the reason that we would want to think critically about plot. So that was something that he had in the chapter about instructional coaches helping build this bank of stories. So then as a new teacher, right, there might be a story that you could pull forward that's somebody else's story, but could help the learning in the classroom.
That's funny. Every now and then when I tell like anecdotes or stories in professional development, I'll have people come up and talk to me afterwards. And every now and then they'll ask me, did that actually happen? Or like, did that like, and not like a accusatory, it's, And when I mean, I embellish some things, right? And like the story twists and turns, like, or shifts as I do different things. I'm not sure if I've ever stolen someone else's story, but there is an assumption, I think, out there for some people in groups that like, oh, they're doing this to make a point. And I guess I don't see anything wrong with that. It just never occurred to me to I'm going to steal Andy or Cari's math brother story, but I'm going to, I made him cry on purpose. I called him dumb. You're not a math person, Brendan. That's my brother.
Well, as long as you say you did that and it wasn't like, well, Cari said,
I need to be telling that
she
story
was
about
telling her
Cari.
brother that he was dumb. You can embellish your own story as long as you put your name in it and take mine out. But I hate to admit this, but I am not the Minnesota state champion at tic-tac-toe. So Andy did make up that story. And by the end of the day, I'm pretty sure I was the world champion, not just the state champion.
It's like the Paul Bunyan of tic-tac-toe.
Yes, thank you. See, now you're on board. Right.
All right. So I just wanted to wrap up our conversation today about stories, about any connections that you guys see to effective questions or thinking prompts that we've already talked about.
Yeah, I mean, definitely thinking prompts. This has me. I mean, those two seem to be intertwined anyways, but man, you put a thinking prompt up in someone and you were just asking them to tell their own stories, right? Or you could do that with modeling, right? Like, here's the thinking prompt. I see this, tell a story about this. Or you could use like thinking prompts as accent points to your stories.
This folds nicely into one of my chapters later on too, authentic learning.
Ooh, so future learning.
Future learning. I'm going to throw that out there in the future.
What's interesting? It doesn't have a ton of connections to the next one. I mean, there's definitely some in there, but I don't think you can draw as many explicit connections to stories as to cooperative learning. Not that the connection isn't there to be made. It's just, it seems those other two, and it sounds like I
can't wait to think about that later on.
Same, because I'm like, I could see that stuff actually. Like stories may not connect very well with cooperative learning in the two ways that he said we would use them in explicit, intensive, or constructivist. I was like, yeah.
Interesting.
Well, thanks for talking stories with me.
Thanks for learning with us today. If something we said sparked a thought, made you nod, or something Andy said made you roll your eyes, we'd love to hear about it. Share the episode, tag a colleague, send it to your PLC, or just keep the conversation going within your own team. You can connect with us via the feedback form in the show notes, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, feedback, and suggestions for topics to cover in future episodes. We're all growing together, and that starts with paying attention to our own practice.